Testing. Okay.
Testing. Oh, we got it. We got it. We got 2 mics. We got 2 people. Done. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We are here representing the city of San Jose, talking about our experience implementing AI governance in our public agency. So, quick introductions. My name is Albert Gahami. I am our city privacy officer, and I think I've told this to actually a number of you in the audience already, but this means that any technology, data initiative, or AI that we're using or interested in purchasing, it goes through us for a review to make sure that it's being used effectively, responsibly, and ultimately that, 20 years down the line, we're looking at the stuff that we're using and we can be proud of it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Layla Doty. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a privacy analyst with the city of San Jose, and so I work with Albert in the city's digital privacy office on issues related to privacy and AI. And just want to thank you so much for being here. We know there's a bunch of other really interesting sessions happening right now, so we appreciate your interest.
So just a little roadmap of what you're going to experience in the next 45 minutes. We'll give you a bit of background on the city of San Jose, show you our AI review framework and where it's come from, what our experience has been piloting it, some lessons learned, and then we'll close out and hopefully have some time to answer questions. So let me give you just a little bit of background of San Jose, California. So San Jose, near and dear to both of our hearts, it is an incredibly diverse community. So you think about both from a racial perspective, you've got roughly 30% of our population is white, 30% is API, 30% is Latina. Within that, you have the largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam. You have over half of our population not speaking English at home. That doesn't mean that they don't speak English, but it gives you a sense that combine that with the fact that roughly 40% of our population is foreign born. We are a community largely of immigrants. And what is, in my opinion, very fascinating about San Jose is we are in the heart of Silicon Valley. Literally from our office, you can see the headquarters of both Zoom and Adobe. And so you have this dichotomy of the tech companies, the tech giants that are building out a lot of these services, these AI systems, and the most vulnerable populations that are concerned about things between being unable to use them, profiling, immigration investigations, living in the same city. And it's because of that that the city has been so avid about creating a digital privacy program. Really, at the end of the day, our job is ensuring that the data that we collect on our residents is used to support our residents. We are involving residents in our technology decisions, holding vendors accountable for what they say they're going to do with us, and ensuring that the departments that we're working with are following our privacy policy. One thing that's been interesting over the last year or so is that we've seen AI increasingly being tried to be embedded into a number of our city processes. So, as a natural evolution of that, our privacy program has also evolved into our AI review and AI accountability program. And we are not alone in this. We talk with a lot of other cities across both the country and especially in Europe, and we're seeing that a number of cities are having their privacy program being expanded to cover AI as well. Unfortunately, this does not come with more AI staffing or capacity, but resourcing is a whole nother conversation. So what we'll share with you here is our framework, experiences, and some lessons learned. And I'll just highlight the 4 key takeaways that we'll talk throughout this presentation. First and foremost is we've identified an AI knowledge gap. Layla and I are the privacy and AI team for the city. We have 7,000 staff members, and we have over 20 departments serving roughly 1 million residents. So you have this situation where you have incredibly smart experts who know their stuff in, say, transportation, public works, but they don't know much about AI. They don't even know when they're using AI. Us know when some system might be using AI, but we can't track all 7,000 staff. So how do you bridge that gap? There's structural challenges, both from us working with our departments and getting them comfortable with this stuff, and also working with vendors and having them comply with what we need. I think we've talked a little bit about vendor fact sheets and all that information, and we'll get into that. And then there's field testing, right? It's one thing to have your models have a 98% accuracy in their marketing material. It's another thing entirely for it to work in your system. And then some implementation skills. Really, some of the things that we found are really useful in the people that you have in charge of your AI and privacy reviews. And with that, I'll pass it off to Layla.
Perfect. Thank you, Albert. Oh, awesome. Wait, how do I use this? The green button?
Big button.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to get into the AI review framework, which, as Albert mentioned, is an initial process for San Jose to ensure that the AI tools that the city procures are safe and effective. And before we get into the framework itself, we want to share a little bit about how we've been developing it over the past 10 months. So we underwent roughly 3 stages of development for the framework, and we began last fall with a literature review of a whole range of publications, going back about 5 to 6 years when this field really started to heat up. And we looked at sources from government, civil society, academia. We looked mostly at papers from the US, but we also took a look at some literature from Europe. And then we also read papers from a variety of disciplines, so policy papers, more theoretical frameworks, and also some critical literature in there too. And after this literature review, we applied what we learned to create a draft review framework. And here we really did our best to pick the policy approaches that made the most sense for a local government context, and specifically for public procurement processes. And in addition, like Albert was mentioning, we're only 2 people, so we picked the approaches that we had the capacity to actually implement. And we were really fortunate throughout this development process to actually be able to consult with experts in the field and get feedback from folks in government, civil society, and academia. And we just want to give a quick shout out and thanks to the people we talked to from Data and Society, the White House OSTP, New America's Open Tech Institute, Stanford University, and San Jose's Privacy Advisory Task Force. So as we met with experts, we integrated the feedback that we received from them and updated the framework. And it really became an iterative process of meeting with experts, taking their feedback, updating the framework, and then meeting with the next group of experts. And we just want to mention here that we were actually really pleased to genuinely receive pretty positive feedback from the folks that we talked to, and a lot of just honestly excitement from folks that a city government was even taking initiative on this issue in the first place, because it's still a very up and coming space. So what you're looking at now on the screen is the product of that whole 10-month development process. This is the whole framework as it's existing right now. Like I mentioned, this is definitely an ongoing iterative process, so it's probably going to look different in the next few months. But we want to give you a preview, and in the following slides, what we're going to do is walk through this framework step by step and explain what's going on. And we'll also be sharing the results of a pilot implementation that we did on the city's 311 translation system. But at a high level, this review framework is embedded in the technology procurement process for the whole city. And you can see on the screen there's some major sections in there. It consists of a risk analysis, an algorithmic impact assessment, and if a tech procurement is approved and that AI system is adopted, we have some mechanisms in there to ensure transparency and accountability of that system once it's actually in deployment. So this review process is triggered when a department in the city wants to procure an AI system. And actually in San Jose, all technology procurements in the city have to go through a centralized procurement review, which includes a privacy review that's already conducted by Albert and myself. So what we've kind of done here is leverage the fact that we're already reviewing all technology procurements in the city. So we've expanded that privacy review to also include AI-specific considerations when there is an AI system that's involved. And I think we're really fortunate here that San Jose has this centralized procurement review, which you see on the screen. Without this centralized process, I think it would be a little bit more difficult for us to actually be confident that we're able to review all AI systems that are being procured. So we piloted this review framework on an AI tool that the city was already using, and that's the Google AutoML translation tool. City staff use this tool to translate resident messages in the San Jose 311 non-emergency helpline. Just a quick show of hands to get a sense. Who here has heard of 311 before, familiar with it? Okay, good amount of folks actually. Just to level set really quickly, when you have like an emergency, you call 911, but if you have a non-urgent issue like pothole, abandoned vehicle in your neighborhood, or maybe a traffic light is broken, you can call 311 or use the app to report that issue. And cities all across the country have 311 services, so there's a good chance that you have 311 where you're from. But San Jose has a very large Spanish-speaking and Vietnamese-speaking populations, like Albert mentioned. So this translation tool is actually really critical to enabling city staff to provide these 311 services to folks who otherwise might not have access to them. And city staff are able to train this system on sentence pairs in English, Vietnamese, and Spanish. So they're able to fine-tune this translation tool with words that frequently come up in these kinds of 311 interactions to improve the accuracy of the translations. So just to give you a really quick sense of how the city's using this tool, I won't take too long on this, but the way the city uses the tool is that a resident can use the 311 app to send in a message in another language, like Vietnamese, for example, on the screen. That message is then translated to English by the tool, and it's sent to city staff. Staff can write their response back in English, and then the tool translates that message from the staff back to the original language, in this case, Vietnamese. Oh, I think we're missing a slide here, but one thing that we wanted to note is that when we piloted this AutoML tool on the framework, this tool had already been used in the city for a few years. And the reason we tested it on this tool is because we didn't actually have an active AI procurement to pilot our framework on. So we chose to test it on an existing system in our department. But I just want to emphasize and clarify here that the framework as we've designed it is intended to begin at the start of the procurement process before a purchasing agreement is made with the vendor, and not retroactively like we did it in our pilot. But as we've been developing this framework and speaking with city staff, one thing that we realized is that there's a significant AI knowledge gap. Albert alluded to this earlier. Many city staff don't actually have a strong understanding of what AI is, and I think this is understandable because artificial intelligence, as we know, can be a very nebulous and imprecise term. People use it to refer to different things. But the issue for us is that if city staff aren't able to identify something as AI, then they're probably not going to consult Albert and I earlier on in the process, which kind of prevents us from being able to intervene early on into procurement requests, and we might have to course correct later on in the procurement pipeline. There was one example where we were speaking with the city employee, and they knew that a system used machine learning techniques, but they told us that they didn't consider ML to be AI. But Albert and I would definitely consider ML to fall under the umbrella term of AI. So I think that just highlights that AI education is something we need to work on in the city. So after we receive a procurement request for an AI tool, the next step is to conduct a risk analysis. And here we're trying to triage if we're dealing with a low, moderate, or high-risk system. And to help us conceptualize this risk, we've created the following spectrum. And I just want to point out that this risk spectrum on the screen was inspired by a paper called From Principles to Practice that was published in 2019 by some scholars in Europe. And on the y-axis, you can see that we have the inability of an individual to opt out of being subject to an AI system. And this ability to opt out is already determined during the privacy risk analysis that takes place. And then on the x-axis, we have the intensity of potential harm of the system. And as we're thinking of, the way that we're thinking of potential harm, it's consisting of three main components. So first we have the type of output that's coming out of the system. Something like an automated decision we'd consider as higher risk than, maybe a simple prediction or forecast. The second component is a level of human oversight that's involved. So a fully autonomous system would definitely be higher risk than, a system that would require some kind of human action at various steps in the process. And then the third component of potential harm is the area of life that's being impacted by the use of this system. So here we're thinking about human rights, health, employment, recreation, things like that. And we have some examples on the spectrum that can kind of give you a sense of how we're thinking about risk for various use cases. And I'm going to pass it back to Albert to explain those real quick.
Yeah, so I'm just going to give you a few stories that we've experienced here in local government. You see on the bottom left there, personalized informational emails about city events. So it was 4 p.m. on a Friday. Our Parks and Rec department urgently came to me and said, Albert, we need to advertise Walk and Roll, which, in case you're wondering, is this adorable program where we try to get parents to walk or bike to school with their kids. We are in local government. The issue was, could we send out personalized informational emails about this to our our city residents? The answer was yes, because this is as you can see, relatively low risk. The intensity of potential harm while missing out on Walk and Roll could be a tragedy. It is not the biggest issue. And if folks did not want future emails, there's an ability to opt out of the emails moving forward. You have other situations like our search algorithm on our website. This is a way for people to access information, and really there's no way for someone to opt out and use a different search algorithm on our website, but there are other options for them. If they can't get their services through that, they can use something like 311. Now, what you see on the top left here is pretrial risk assessment, which is not something that the city does. Let's just make that clear. But you do have conversations in the city around things. Like a few years ago, the city was using a place-based predictive policing system. We do not use that anymore, but those are the types of things that you can think about that both have a high intensity of harm and a strong inability to opt out. And so, as we've talked about this, for 311, the AutoML translation system, we've put it somewhere around the middle. Again, the potential harm that you have is access to services, but it's not necessarily something that's denying someone rights. So, important, but not life-threatening. An inability to opt out. Again, this is a translation system that's going through text. So if push comes to shove and they don't want to use it, they can call and we can get them on the call with a translator. But the thing is, that's an additional step. They might not be in an area where they can make a call. So there is this element of not being able to opt out, and that's why we've put it kind of in the center here.
Awesome, thanks, Albert. So if a proposal presents very minimal risk at this stage, it can actually be approved without any further review. However, for systems that present a medium to high risk, those are going to have to undergo an algorithmic impact assessment, which allows us to dig deeper into the benefits and the risks that the system presents. So this algorithmic impact assessment step consists of two key documents. The first is the impact assessment form, which is completed by the procuring city department. And the second document is the AI fact sheet, which is completed by the vendor. And the city staff-facing document, the impact assessment form, allows us to understand the motivation for this procurement proposal. And here we're asking city staff questions that they should be able to pretty easily answer. For example, things like the purpose of the AI system and why they're choosing automation as their solution in the first place. Here we're really trying to get staff to think about what could go wrong if the system went awry, and especially thinking in terms of equity impacts of the system. And the impact assessment form, it consists of about 20 different questions, and those questions were all inspired by a range of different sources, including impact assessment templates released by the federal government, a bunch of think tanks, so just want to give some credit there. And then the second document, the vendor AI fact sheet, it's on the right side of the screen, that's for the vendors to complete, and it's intended to give Albert and I a strong sense of the technical details and capabilities of the system. This is a level of technical information that city staff generally wouldn't be able to give us, which is why we're going to the vendor to get that information. So things like training data, performance metrics, and conditions that the model might perform really well in versus not so well. These are all things that we want to be informed of. And the fact sheet that we put together, we have to mention and give credit. It was very heavily inspired by IBM fact sheets, just the public template that's available online. But here, together these documents give us a really holistic understanding of the AI system. And this two-pronged approach, it helps Albert and I be able to compare both documents to really see if the technical capabilities of the system can actually meet the needs that the department is telling us. So what you're looking at now on the screen is part of the impact assessment form for the SJ311 translation tool that we mentioned earlier. And you can see here we're asking staff about the purpose of the tool. They told us that they need a way to provide services to Spanish and Vietnamese-speaking residents. And we're also asking why they're choosing automation in the first place, getting staff to think about, is an AI system necessary? Could a human do this job just as well, if not better, than a technical tool? We also have some questions on here about equity and which subgroups of residents might be impacted by the use of this system. Maybe folks in certain neighborhoods might feel the impacts more. Also asking if an individual's rights might be impacted or their economic status. And then we have a section about the degree of human oversight that's involved. Is the system going to be fully autonomous? Is there going to be human intervention at various stages? What's the degree of involvement that the vendor is going to have throughout the life cycle of this AI system? And the key here isn't to get a 100% correct answer from city staff. What we're really looking for here, the intention of this form, is to get staff thinking this way about AI systems, and also, secondly, and maybe more importantly, make sure that Albert and I have enough information to ask deeper questions later and have follow-up conversations later to really get a strong understanding of the system. And we were pleasantly surprised to find that, when we asked staff to complete this new form, they were very willing to take the 20 to 30 minutes that it took to fill this out. And we found that folks could, for the most part, get behind the idea that we're trying to do our due diligence here and prevent AI systems from inflicting harm on our community members, and really, put up guardrails so that we can ensure that these systems are safe and effective. So even though we were making government employees fill out another form, we really didn't get much pushback, and folks were very cooperative. So that was pleasant for us to find out. And I'll pass it back to Albert to talk about vendor fact sheets.
Thank you. So once we have the information from our departments on how they want to use the AI system, we pair that with information that we get from the vendor. Like Layla said, technical details around how the model was trained, what's it trained on, what is it supposed to be used for, and one of the most important parts in our mind is things like performance metrics, right? How should we be evaluating this model, and what metrics, or how is it performing on those things? We also have a section around accuracy, equity, and explainability, basically to try and get at the heart of some of the key concerns that we have about implementing an AI system in the public sector. One of the things that we learned throughout this process is that getting vendors to fill this out has been a mixed bag. There have been some vendors that have been very willing and excited to fill this out because for them, responsible AI is a part of their product line, or selling point. But for example, in this case with the AutoML translation tool, we basically had to fill out the form on Google's behalf. And I want to make clear, they had ample amounts of information available, and we were able to go onto our Google Cloud platform and access a lot of this metrics directly. But the fact remains is that we took several hours of staff time for us to be able to fill out what hopefully one day is a standard fact sheet that vendors can provide to all government agencies around the information of their AI systems. And if there's one thing that we really want to push forward is that hopefully as soon as we can, we get to this standard practice that there is a standardized sheet that vendors can fill out and provide to all of their potential customers. So once we get through that process, we've reviewed the system, maybe we make some edits to how the system should be applied, but it's overall approved. we put it out on our algorithmic register. And you can go to this on our City of San Jose website. If you go on to sanjoseca.gov/digital privacy, you can see everything that we're doing around privacy and AI. But this is basically us trying to copy what Amsterdam has done with their algorithmic register and explain to residents, here are the types of AI systems that you're going to see are being used by the city. Here's how they work, here's what they do, and here's how we're monitoring them. And we find that this type of transparency has really helped us in working with our residents to tell them, like, hey, these systems are meant to serve the community. And we found pretty positive results when taking this collaborative approach. Once we have that, the last part is ongoing monitoring. And like Layla said, this pilot that we did with our translation system is something that was less than a year ago. And our current approach is to review systems roughly annually. So we haven't done an annual review of this system yet, but from the impact metrics that we saw, we noticed that there was relative underperformance on Vietnamese to English translation, and that has actually spawned an effort in our 311 team to build out the language translation pairs, basically, English and Vietnamese corresponding pairs, to improve this model. And that's been really exciting, honestly, for us, is how positively our city has responded, like, oh, that's a problem? Great, let's fix it. But an example that we actually have had for over a year is on our AI-based traffic metrics. So really valuable for Department of Transportation to understand how many cars are passing an intersection, how many pedestrians, are there any near misses, which is basically an almost accident, you can think of it that way. And basically what we did is reviewed that system for how accurate is it. So this does not take a statistician. This simply takes a human being looking at the footage that was captured with the data that was labeled and seeing how accurate it is. And through that, we are able to figure out what parts of this data collection we can trust and what parts we should make sure a human is verifying before it's being used. And this type of stuff just helps us figure out our strategy when we're implementing our AI systems to be the most useful they can be. So, we'll move on to lessons learned here. We're coming out to the close. As we've talked about, these are our 4 key components, and we'll walk through each one. So, like Layla and I have mentioned, there's the AI knowledge gap between all the staff that are trying to use systems that might have AI and us who are here to review and educate how we should be using that AI. The approach that we have taken really is leveraging the city's centralized procurement or centralized purchasing process to make sure that any technology goes to us. What this means is that 90% of the time someone is asking us if they can purchase a printer. And we say, yes, please purchase your printer, and it takes all of 2 minutes. But we'd rather spend those 2 minutes approving every printer because it allows us to catch everything that is of high risk. So you pair that with the structural challenges that we've seen. So like we said, both from a vendor and from a city standpoint, getting over that institutional inertia to make sure that we have something standardized so that we can expect vendors to have this type of vendor fact sheet or information on hand, ready to go. Next, there's field testing. And one thing I want to call out here, right, the current field testing that we're doing is very by hand. We reviewed our automated license plate reader system, which basically required me sitting in the police department manually for 4 hours looking at pictures of license plates and the reads of those license plates and see, did this get read correctly? In a perfect world, the systems that we're purchasing from our vendors have a easier way to do this within the platform to test accuracy. And lastly, we want to highlight implementation skills. As we're trying to push through the structural challenges, we find that a mix of technical and soft people skills are essential for this. So obviously you need people that know the law, know AI to a certain extent to be able to provide that sort of expertise and education. But one of the things that we found most valuable is being approachable and diplomatic. At the end of the day, we are basically another regulator in an already over-regulated bureaucracy. Getting people on our side can be hard, and It's important that we come to people with a smile and a constructive approach, because that leads them to come to us with their AI systems before we even have to get to the procurement process. We make sure that we're aligned to our agency mission. For San Jose, one of our biggest efforts is making sure that residents aren't having their immigration status investigated, and always bringing things like that to the forefront of showing on how we, through privacy and AI regulations, can protect that. Being friendly and scrappy, because why would a public agency be well-funded? So that's everything you see here, and with that, I'll pass it off to Layla for closing.
Thanks, Albert. So this brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. We hope you all found it interesting. We've enjoyed, the opportunity to share our work with you. Before we open it up to some questions and comments, we just want to give you a preview of some next steps for the city of San Jose in the realm of AI governance. The first thing is that we're going to be working to formalize the AI governance practices that we've begun to build here and shared with you today. Specifically, we're going to work to build out some standard language to include in vendor agreements and also draft a citywide AI policy. We're also looking to work with like-minded institutions to work towards a standard for how vendors can provide details to governments about their AI systems. In an ideal world, we'd be able to take an AI system out of its box and then, based on its nutrition label or a fact sheet, we'd have a strong understanding of how that system works, what its strengths are, and its weaknesses. And then finally, we're looking to grow the community of practice here, especially with regard to how governments are evaluating AI. And we're hoping to work with some other municipalities to identify and work towards best practices, because this is still a very new space and we're all learning how to do it together. So that's what we have up next. If you're at all interested in continuing this conversation with us, the best place to reach us is at that email address on the screen. It's digitalprivacy@sanjoseca.gov. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're very friendly, we don't bite, and we're always looking to collaborate with folks. So that's it from us. Thanks so much for your attention, and we'll open it up to questions and comments from the audience.
Hi, thanks so much. That was really, really interesting. My name's Kate Kay. I'm a deputy director at World Privacy Forum. We do a lot of data privacy related research that informs policy. But I'm kind of asking a question on a personal level. I live in Portland, Oregon, and the city recently passed a surveillance policy, and it is kind of an offshoot of a privacy policy, and they want it to lead into their automated decision system policy that might exist someday. You might have even been in touch with them, I imagine, because I know they are trying to look at what other city governments are doing. So as a concerned citizen, I'm kind of watching what's happening, and I intend to partake in some kind of community engagement forums they're going to be holding. And one of the concerns I have is, so the police department is possibly going to be piloting a drone program. And there was a surveillance impact assessment done of that, but like before the thing even exists. It was sort of like an idea, a way to, create a framework for this. And it's an example of something that I think might not even trigger the procurement process. So the police have suggested that, oh, well, we'll just buy the drones on Amazon, right? So this is kind of an example of these, tech procurement that happens in a way that doesn't go through the formal procurement process. And I wonder if you've seen examples of that happening, like how, if there have been any changes made in the San Jose procurement process that would ensure that certain types of tech procurement does trigger an evaluation by your team. Just maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. And yes, Portland did just put something out. We've been talking very closely with them. It's exciting for them. We're celebrating them actually getting something across. But in regards to this type of, how would you put it, uh, non-standard procurement process, right? The canonical idea of someone going onto Amazon and buying something rather than working with the departments. It's a real problem, right? And there's two ways that we combat that. First, the city of San Jose is fairly lucky in our centralized procurement process and the culture that it has. I can't tell you how many times we have had people try to purchase things off of Amazon, but they get stopped, whether by someone in their own department or someone in our purchasing department that makes sure it goes through the right channels. And that's great and all, but this really is where the education and the soft skills come into play. We need to be viewed as a resource. And for things like drones, which is actually a conversation we're having right now, what has been incredibly valuable is we are viewed as a resource in the city. And so you have people, even in PD, even in Department of Transportation, that are coming to us with these questions rather than coming to us saying, hey, we're already doing this, right? And that type of collaborative environment has been incredibly essential for us to make these things work the way they need to.
Cool. Hi. Really appreciate the talk. I'm an engineer and I actually live in San Jose, so I was quite interested in listening and excited to see the progress on that front. I have two questions. So the first question I had is on the picture you have with the process, there was an arrow that goes to the left when you reject, and I didn't see the arrow coming up again. So I'm interested in understanding if you get into one of these, you review and you ended up finding that maybe it's not appropriate or it's violating some of the policies you have set in place, do these vendors get to come back and maybe say like, hey, we fixed the system according to your specifications, can you evaluate this again? And I know these oftentimes are time restricted, so there's that component as well. So I would like to understand how that goes back into the loop. And the second question I had was, I think we've seen, like, especially in this conference, how important it is to have a lot of these systems in place for responsible AI and the impacts they have on a lot of people. However, I'm interested in understanding if you've seen that maybe smaller companies have less resources dedicated to this, so maybe they haven't even thought through the process, or I feel like oftentimes this tends to be an afterthought when building these products, and smaller companies are like, oh yeah, I have this idea, I'm gonna build this, and they don't sometimes think on how these impacts happen. So the question would be like, in the year you've been using this, how do you think that has impacted smaller companies more than larger companies, for example, and how they have reacted to that? Thank you.
Sure.
So to your first point around procurement, right, if something is rejected, and it's the same for AI, also for privacy, cybersecurity, you name it, right? If it gets rejected, depending on the process, depends on, if you can go, obviously, unless you've done something horrendous, you're not blacklisted, you'll be able to participate in other types of procurement processes, right? If it's a time-based RFP, or there's a set date when things need to be awarded. If your proposal gets rejected, depending on time, right, it can get a little tricky. But what we really try to do in all circumstances is, one, while we're doing the assessments, make those caveats in flight, if you will. Make sure that we're trying to make those adjustments with you, because if there's something valuable there that's worth investing in, we want to see if we can get that and mitigate all of the privacy and AI risks associated with it. So rejection is rare. It often is modification. We do have rejections. You can see them on our website. But yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks for your question. To your second question about working with bigger versus smaller companies and to fill out the vendor fact sheet and get info from them, I think initially your intuition might be that bigger companies have a better ability to provide you with this information, but actually, and Albert, jump in if you have other thoughts, but in our experience, when we worked with a smaller vendor, they were actually more willing than Google, the bigger vendor, to actually work with us, more frequently and give us more information about their system. I think maybe because it was a higher stakes situation for them, maybe than a bigger company like Google. And actually, we learned that some small companies are really happy about this work that we're doing to promote responsible AI because, at large, it's sort of improving AI education for the public and also for government officials who, like we mentioned, still don't have a super strong understanding of AI systems. And that, increase in understanding of AI actually, they've mentioned to us, benefits them because then more folks understand their product and want to buy it. So there's actually a lot of excitement from companies in the work that we're doing.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rosmi from Cornell Tech. I have two questions. One of them is, how did you get support to resource and prioritize this type of work? And the second question is, after you've procured something and deployed it, if it falls out of compliance or isn't according to your standards, are there like punitive or corrective actions you all take? Are there like legal mechanisms to hold vendors accountable? I'm curious what happens at that point.
Yeah, for sure. So to your first point, right? We are the product of years of effort before us at the highest level of our city government, pushing for this as a value, as a priority, right? We started our privacy program, I got hired as our first chief privacy officer in 2021, late 2021. But it started in 2017 when our chief information officer and our city manager's office were talking, hey, privacy is important, we need to be thinking about this, right? And over the course of those years, they put together the first policy, putting where should this responsibility lie. It was a long process of building up that support. And one of the things that we see, hopefully, over the next couple of years is that because there are a few cities like us, like Portland, like Seattle, that have put out some of this thought already, that hopefully the next cities that are building this up, they might still need to find that champion sponsorship at the execs level, which always takes some political playing. But once they're ready, they have all of this information and templates ready to go. Now, in terms of what happens when a vendor doesn't do what we expect them to do, or follow up, that's where the annual monitoring comes in, right? We have annual metrics. We discuss those with the departments. We talk with them. Per our council-approved policy, we have the power to make sure that the information that we're processing and data we're using complies with our privacy policy. We have not been in a situation yet, fingers crossed, where we have had to penalize a department. Because again, fortunately, actually, things have been very collaborative. But that remains to be seen. So reach back out to us in a year, maybe we'll have something.
All right, hello. So thank you both for this really insightful, enlightening talk. I'm Will Santo. I'm born and raised in the Bay Area, resident right now of San Jose. Shout out to East Side. So I have a question. Yeah, I love the East Side. Anyways, I have a question based on something you mentioned in passing, which is that we aren't using pretrial risk assessment in the city right now. But I remember a few years back, we had California Prop 25 in 2020 to replace cash bail with a risk assessment tool. So say that actually passed. Luckily, it didn't pass. But say that passed, and we're stuck choosing between bias systems such as VPRAI or Compass. Are your hands completely tied where you have to pick one of these systems, especially in cases where there's limited amounts of vendors? Or are there ways for your team to push back and say, no, we've reviewed everything is really high risk, we shouldn't use any of these tools? What can you do in those situations?
Yeah, so we can tackle that in a few ways. I'll start, and if you have anything to add, please. First and foremost, San Jose, we're, at least in this regard, we don't really have to deal much with a DA's office. That's handled at the county level, right? So even if, say, a pretrial or you're talking about, right, that type of system comes into effect, it's going to be the county that's handling that. Our job really in our AI systems would be from, suspect to conviction, or not conviction, but, to the point where they're at the DA's office, right? But you bring up a great point, right? What happens when the state does something that conflicts with what we think is valuable? And this is actually something that we're in the process of dealing with right now. So there's this government code, California Government Code 34090, that basically lays out that every record that the government has needs to be kept for 2 years, at least, right? This was decades ago. right? When everything was about storing and keeping the information so that it was available for the public. This goes into direct conflict with privacy risks of we're collecting large amounts of data. We don't want to store all of that data for 2 years at least, right? So we are in an active conversation, active advocacy around seeing if there's ways to reduce that retention time. And, you know, for lack of a better term, unfortunately, better or worse, if there's something that comes from the state level, especially like a proposition that we have to follow, we have to follow. But we also play a critical role in supporting and informing our state legislature around what policies should go into place. And we're in active conversations with them and recommendations for what should be happening.
One final question from one of our virtual attendees. Is there a public repository of the vendor's fact sheet and staff members' impact assessment documents? This is from Roya.
Yeah, thank you for that question from our virtual audience. You can actually find all of this information, the documents that we showed on screen today. It's on our digital privacy webpage. We've uploaded all that documentation for the 311 pilot, and we also have 1 or 2 other technology pilots that we did too. So please feel free to look at that if that interests you.
And if you're curious on some of the things like the ALPR and the traffic metric stuff, you'll find that under our data usage policies information, because that started privacy first, and we have our annual usage report metrics around accuracy there too.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and thank all of our amazing speakers from the session.